In this video, I'm going to take 3 church designs that are in need of improvement, and I'll show you how to transform them step by step into designs that communicate clearly as well as beautifully. Perhaps you can relate to this common experience when designing for church. You're creating something and you know that it doesn't quite look as good as you'd hoped it would, but you're not entirely sure how to go about making it better. That's the problem that I want to solve with this series of videos. We're going to be looking at real church designs, but I've tweaked them slightly to make them anonymous, because we're not out here to make any churches feel bad about their design work. But it is valuable to learn from actual churches with their real-world examples, so that we can try and improve our design skills. So let's take a look at our first design. This poster was displayed outside a church in order to invite people to their 2 Christmas events. Before we try and improve it, I just want to highlight a couple of things that I think they've done well. They've got a pretty good colour contrast between the text and the background, which means that all of the text is easy to read, and they've chosen a typeface that's clear and it's simple and it's legible. So anyone walking past should be able to read this poster without any problems. But I think we want to try and do a bit more than that, so let's see if we can improve it. The first thing that I noticed about this design that needs improving is that it lacks consistency, and it does this in a few different ways. Pretty much every line has a different font size, which makes it quite hard for us to figure out what the most important information is. Not only this, but the 2 events have completely different formatting. So this first event has the date on line 1, but then the second event has it on line 2. And this makes it hard for our brains to find the key information. Even just making the text for the events consistently sized and formatted can make it easier to comprehend. There's also this strange kind of double underline, and then later on there's a dashed divider, which have different styles and different weights, and that makes it feel a little bit disjointed. So I'm going to remove these and instead add 2 identical boxes, and these will house the 2 events, and that helps identify them as 2 separate chunks of information, and it also helps keep the event information separate to the rest of the text. The typography and the illustrations don't really match either. There's nothing that makes them feel like they belong together. They're different colours and styles, and that gives the impression of some random clip art that's just been picked from the web. So to improve this, I'm going to create my own little star element that can be repeated throughout the design. We can then use this to dot the I in Christmas, and then also use it in a couple of illustrations that I'm going to add that represent each of the events. So if we keep these stars the same colour throughout, it adds further unity between the typography and the illustrations. So all these factors contributed to an overall sense of inconsistency in the design, and it makes it seem like various elements have just been put together without much consideration. The first changes that we've just made helped improve the unity of the design. Unity is a graphic design principle, and it helps us create designs that are beautiful and intentional. If you want to learn more about graphic design principles and how to apply them to your church designs, you might be interested in the Church Graphic Design Training Programme. This is an online course which gives church staff and volunteers the confidence and skills to design beautiful graphics and to improve their visual communication. For more information, head to greaterworth.co.uk. The second main issue is the use of colour. The colour palette in this design to me just looks like the basic colours you get in Microsoft Word, so it doesn't really feel like the colour palette was an intentional decision. So let's simplify it down to just a green and a gold. These are lovely Christmassy colours, and we can also use a lighter version of the green to give us some more options. This church appears to have printed the design on A4 white paper, just using a normal printer in the church office. And this is a crucial detail to keep in mind when we're making any design decisions. We could decide to give this poster a dark background, and it could look really cool, but it would use a lot of ink and some printers would really struggle. So we're going to keep it a white background for now. And that's why it can be so essential to figure out how a design will be printed or displayed before starting the design process, because it will likely influence a lot of our decisions. The final thing that I want to improve in this design is the typography. We've already added some variety in terms of the sizing of text, but let's add some distinction between different information by adding italics and by changing the weight of the font, so making it bold in places. They've also used the font Times New Roman, and there's nothing wrong with using that font. except that it's just been pretty overused and it just makes me think of my university essays. So let's pick something similar, but slightly more elevated. Here I've gone with Libre Castellon Text, which is a free font from Google Fonts. If we look at our before and after, we've kept this design really simple. It's still something that could be created in really basic software like Microsoft Word, but to me it appears much clearer and more attractive. But I'd love to hear what you think about it. Is the new design better, or would you have taken things in a slightly different direction? Let me know in the comments. And let's move on to our second design. This is a design advertising a church group for kids called Energize. They've made a square composition, which they're using on their website, as well as using it for WhatsApp and social media. And I think they've done a good job in choosing colours that are vibrant and full of energy. And I think that's pretty important for a design advertising a children's event. And they've also got a bold title that's much bigger than the rest of the text, and that's great because it really makes the text stand out. It makes it clear to us that this is what our eyes should be drawn to first. But the thing that I notice first that needs improvement is that there's just so much going on in this design. We've got bright colours and bold shapes and a lot of text, so let's start by simplifying the design as much as we can by getting rid of some of the non-essential details. I think we can also simplify the design by reducing the size of these star elements. If we make them a bit smaller and overlapping only with the title and not with the body text, it makes everything a little bit easier to read. Another way to improve the legibility of the design is to get rid of the all caps. When we use all capital letters, it can make it much harder to read longer sections of text. In this case, it's okay for the title, but I think we'll change it for the body text. And the text is also currently running right to the edges of the design, which is quite uncomfortable to read. So adding a margin gives space around the words, and that's what helps your eye focus on the text. We can also change the alignment of the text from centered to left aligned, and that makes it a little bit easier to read because it helps our brain find the next line more easily. I'm also going to put some of the text in these white boxes because this helps the key information stand out. And these details are important because they're the ages of the children that Energize is for. So this information is what helps people figure out if the design is aimed at them. And it also serves as a way to break up the information, again making it easier for the viewer to take it in. If we darken the background slightly as well, we can also increase the contrast between the orange background and the white text, and that just helps our text stand out more clearly. Then the last changes that I want to make involve adding some depth to the design. It currently feels a little bit flat to me, so I'll add a large star element behind the design and then reduce the opacity so that it's very, very subtle. This means it doesn't distract from the text, but it just gives the design a little bit more energy, which is really important for a kids event called Energize. I'm also going to add a little bit more depth with some texture, and I've chosen here a really subtle half-tone texture. And then the last change I'll make is just to add a bit more playfulness to the design. It's advertising a kids event, and the text otherwise looks quite serious, so I'm going to add some effects to the title with a kind of black outline and block shadow, and I think it gives it a kind of cartoon type look, which to me makes it appear a bit more like a kids event. So let's take a look at our before and after. We've kept a lot of the same elements in both designs. So we've still got the orange background, this bold title and the yellow star elements, but our changes have made it a little bit easier to read, and so the message comes across more effectively. And the final design that we're going to fix is this slide, advertising a spring sale and clothing fair, which is a community event that this church is running. And the design is a presentation slide that could be used before or after the church service, but it was also used as a social media post. As for what this design does well, it does have a hierarchy, which means that you look at the most important information first. The first thing that you see is the title of the event, which is great. And then the other thing that I think they've done really well is that they've included an appropriate amount of detail, meaning that they've not tried to cram too much information in. We've got the key details and then nothing more, which is great. They've also done quite a good job of using colours that reflect the nature of the event, and it feels really fitting for spring. However, I do think there's room for improvement, and the major thing that bothers me with this design is the way in which they've used different, seemingly random text effects for each line of text, And to me, these also kind of look like the default effects from an old version of Microsoft PowerPoint. I don't know if that's true, but that's the vibe that it's giving. So let's get rid of those. But now the text is quite difficult to read on that background because it's quite bright and busy. So to solve this problem, I've chosen another image of a flower to use as the background, but this one has a single focal point. It's got one flower, and that means it's less busy and it helps reduce the visual clutter on the design. This image is also a little bit darker than the other image, which means that there's more contrast between the background and then the text on top of it, which makes it easier to read. And if we want to keep that kind of blurred flower style that we had on the other background, we can add a slight blur effect, and this helps the text stand out even further. The typeface that they've used is Arial, which is the default font on a lot of programs, and there's nothing really wrong with using Arial, but to me it just gives the impression that you've not really chosen the best typeface for the design. You've just used whatever typeface the software provides. So for this event, I think I want to choose a typeface that feels warm and approachable. So I'm going to choose Averia Serif Libre, which is another free font from Google Fonts. And to me, this just makes it appear slightly more intentional. This is another example of a design where everything has just been center aligned without any real purpose. So let's left align the small text at the bottom and add some interesting alignment for the title. So I've chosen to place the title text on 2 lines so that it can be slightly bigger. And then I've chosen to fit the loop of the G in this nice gap between the L and the T of clothing, and I think this just adds a little bit of visual interest. I'm then going to reorder some of the lines of text because I want the next thing people see after the title to be the date and time of the event. I also don't actually think I need to include the address on here, because the slide is being shown in the church building, in which case people are already at the event location, so they know where it is. Or they might see it on Facebook, where the event location can easily be provided in a caption or generally is displayed on their profile. So if we place the before and after next to each other, the new design is much less cluttered, and I think it's better. But what do you think? Have I improved these 3 designs? Did you like them better before? Or would you have done anything differently to me? And if you'd like to submit one of your church designs for me to critique, I've put a link in the description for you to do that. And if you want to learn the design principles that can help you improve your own church design, take a look at my training program that's linked below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.